Welcome everyone to another video today with Thoralf and me, Carl. We're doing something special today. We're talking a lot and we realized that a lot of new players don't know about old cards. They're looking in their hand and like, these cards are awesome, and little do they know, maybe these cards saw tons of play way back in the past and they don't know. And the same way, if you haven't touched Magic cards for like 15 years and you're wondering if your old cards are still really relevant today, we realized we have this opportunity to mix both ideas. I asked Thoralf here, who is the perfect person for this, because you were playing recently, very competitively, and you played for so long. You know all the old stories. If there's one person that knows all this time span of Magic, it's Thoralf. So, I asked you to come up with 5 cards that were really relevant way back in the past and are still very strong and played today. You're going to present them to me, and you guys can hopefully learn a bit about some key cards in the life of Magic. But before you get into this, I know I say this all the time, but we have to keep in mind that Cardmarket, I know the logo is here, but no, this is not a YouTube channel. Cardmarket is a company. It's an online marketplace where you get to sell your cards for considerably cheaper. The reason why cards in Europe, for example, are so much cheaper than in the US is because it's a community and a marketplace, and we work together and we enable this. So because this is not primarily a YouTube channel, one of the ways of showing the card market management that this is worth it to invest money into YouTube videos as well is to show your support by clicking subscribe. And if you're already subscribed, maybe show one of your friends. Next time you're at F&M, you're like, oh, did you watch the Card Market YouTube channel there? They're doing some pretty good stuff. And then it counts as a sub because you know how it works. Anyways.
Maybe they also want to buy some of those cards because they realize, oh, they're still good today.
Specifically, yeah. All right, let's get into it.
Okay, so there's some connection, right, between the history of Magic and the old cards, the rare cards, and the cards that are still played today. There sometimes isn't the same reason, you know? Like some cards were good before and good now, but the format maybe changed, the application changed, so we will get a lot through in the cards and see what they was.
Okay.
All right, so the first card I chose is Richard and Port.
Oh, that one's a classic.
Classic. Richard and Port, you can tap for 1 colorless mana, or you can tap a land. And at first glance, that deal seems kind of meh.
Yeah, because you're tapping 2 of your lands for 1 of theirs.
Yeah, I remember when I started playing, I looked at a land and thought, this is crap. I mean, why would I pay 2 to tap 1? That doesn't make any sense. But obviously, 1 can be the biggest difference of all. Like if you have a counter spell, it costs 2 mana, but you leave 2 blue open, and then your opponent says, like, I tap this one. Then you go like, oh, I just lost my turn. You know, I lost my reactive. And that's basically what it is used for. It is used to make your opponent either not use their mana on their turn because they want to play creatures, or make them tap their mana because you want to play something and they shouldn't interact. And it's played in many, like back then, it was one of the best lands you had. You didn't have many lands, so you basically just had this. And then you tapped your opponent's lands in their upkeep because you didn't want them to play a big creature, right, in the control decks. Or if you were like a combo deck, you played this to tap your opponent down and play this. This was back then. It was even so good, it was banned in Block Constructed.
This was banned in Block?
I mean, Block Constructed, in case you don't know, because Block Constructed is like an old...
it's gone the way of the dodo.
It was a very important format which had a big tournament once a year, which was the only Block Constructed once every 3 sets of a block came out. Yeah, that was basically banned because it was just too good.
Yeah. You were playing only the sets that were in that specific block.
Yes.
Blocks would be linked thematically together, and the cards would usually be made to interact with each other, so it was like a small, tiny 1-year standard environment. And they said you can't play Retreat and Port in it.
Yes, because, I mean, every deck played it. Just literally every deck was playing 4 ports.
One cool relevant thing about this is you could also, if I saw that you only had red mana, and I was expecting you to play I don't know, Wheel of Fortune, I can tap down your red mana. Even if you had 6 lands, yes, you lost your red.
Which made the mana usage like in your deck a bit awkward, because if you, let's say, you're splashing a card for 1 island, right? And you only have that 1 island in your deck, it's kind of risky against Port because you might lose that island every upkeep. So you have to basically play 2 islands, but then maybe you also have to play 2 mountains. I mean, with dual lands, it's a bit easier, but it could get you into situations where it was really awkward.
So this card saw tons of play back in the day.
Yes.
I'm assuming you're showing it to me because it's still played today.
Yes, and mainly it's not played in the control decks anymore because they have better stuff to do with their mana. I mean, back then, like, your mana was kind of relevant. The removal spells are very good. Today, you do a lot. You draw more cards, you kill more stuff, you play your own threats, whatever. But in the prison decks that are played nowadays in Legacy or Vintage, this is still one of the go-to lands. And we're talking about like the deck lands itself, which plays, I don't know, like 40, 45 lands, like insanely much, you know. That just plays this because it wants your opponent to be slower. You have Death and Texas can play this because you have Ether Vial, so you can use the Mana Fire.
Also, the lands deck has a lot of ways of going to get lands. So if this is a key line you need in a specific spot, it goes to get it, and you use it for that. If not, you go use another land.
Yeah, and you can play it in like other combo decks where you just put the land in and then tap your opponent. Yeah, but it's not as dominant as it was back then because the amount of lands you can play are vastly, like, you have more access to it and they are better spells, but it's still free. You know,
it goes to say that in a format like Legacy, where you're playing tons of the best cards ever printed in the last 30 years, decks like Goblins or Death and Taxes still choose to be like, you know what, I'm still going to run this card. So if you still have your own Rashidun ports at home, they're not bad now. You still get to use them for stuff.
Yeah, still very good card.
No one's going to see you drop this and be like, why are you playing this? They'll be like, oh, port, of course.
Also, if you have a foil port at home, for some reason, I mean, you can just throw a Christmas party. You know? they're insanely valuable.
Let's look at number 2.
All right, number 2 is Nimble Mongoose. Have you seen that before?
I mean, as a child, when I used to play Odyssey every day, yes.
Yeah, Nimble Mongoose, 1 green, 1/1. Not surprising so far. It gets +2/+2 when you have Threshold, which is a mechanic where you need to have at least 7 cards in your graveyard, so then it becomes a 3/3. But the most important is it has Shroud. So it can't be targeted by either you or me, nobody. It's kind of like Hexproof for both, right? And yeah, the reason it was played because you just couldn't get rid of it. Like the decks nowadays, as in the beginning of Magic, play this with a lot of interaction, Force of Will, Lightning Bolt, Force of Flowshares, Daze, all of those things. And you just play it on 1 or anytime later for just 1 mana. It's a beater, they can get rid of it, and you deal with literally everything else they do. So it's the only creature that you really care about, and then they just hit every time for 3. Bang, 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 bang.
Yeah, in Magic we call this Protect the Queen, which is usually you put 1 threat on the board. It's not killing you immediately, but I'll hit you for 3 every turn, and then I'll just defend it and prevent you from doing what you want to do. Yeah. In this case, you don't even need to spend that much to defend it, because it defends itself.
Exactly. Like, you're just caring about your opponent's other stuff, you wasteland them, you stifle their fetch lands, you whatever you can to make their creatures and their men die, and then you just win the game.
That's it. You don't care, you're boinging them in the face for 3 every turn.
Yeah. The reason why nowadays, in the meantime, it fell a little off because Threshold is a mechanic that works heavily against Delve, and Delve is very powerful because you get mana out of your graveyard. So when we're talking about Murktide Regent or the 5/5 Gurmak Angler, right? All of those cards were not good because of the Mongoose needing Threshold. So the Mongoose was kind of cut. But nowadays, it still sees some play when they want to go to this old rules kind of deck. And it's still playing in Legacy. Yep.
Especially in decks that don't play black necessarily.
Like exactly.
The blue, red, green Delver decks.
Yeah, the Temur or Rock Delvers. It's still the go-to threat. And it turns out, Hexproof or Shroud is very hard to deal with, you know?
Yeah. So at home, this isn't uncommon. So if ever you are a newer player and you're looking for a good threat that you won't see in the recent sets to put in your aggressive deck that has a lot of spells that put stuff in your graveyard, this is a great choice. This card's hella powerful.
Yep. Agreed. All right, number 3. Oh, I love that card.
Just revealing the card, I can see your face.
It's Oath of Druids, which all of you might know from the Legacy Cube or the Vintage Cubes. Right? It's basically a staple. Okay, what does Oath of Druid do?
Why was this card good, Tom?
Yes, in your upkeep, when your opponent has more creatures than you, you reveal the top card of your library until you hit a creature, and you can put it into play for free. Which obviously naturally sounds insane. You put something into play that's very good, but also since you don't play creatures, besides the 1 creature or the 2 creatures in your deck that you want to get, your opponent mostly have the creatures. And you said it's a both-way street. Like, this also works to your opponent, but I mean, once you have a creature, they're probably dead.
I assume the kind of decks that play this also pack creatures that are far better than your opponent's creatures if you're only playing 1 of them in your deck.
Yes. Yes, like you basically play the creature that wins the game.
So I know that before this was banned in places, it was Progenitus. What were they playing back in the day?
So there's kind of like two eras of this card, and it depends on the land that gives the token to your opponent, the Orchard.
Oh yeah, Forbidden Orchard.
Forbidden Orchard, right. So at the point before the Orchard, you could not really make your opponent have a creature. So it was kind of a control deck that just played a control deck, but once your opponent played a creature, you just said,
here you go.
Yeah, and a lot of the ways of dealing with opposing creatures are actually killing your creatures when you play against Auto Druids, but like the gameplay was weird. And believe it or not, the creature that you put into play with it was Morphling. That was the best creature you had.
That was the big payoff?
That was the payoff.
You're saving 3 mana.
you also sneak around counter spells and stuff, but yes, that was basically what you do for a long period of time. You just played Morphling and it was too powerful. They couldn't get rid of it. You talked about Hexproof.
Yeah.
Morphling also gets Shroud. That was it, and since it was your only creature, nothing could rival it. It could untap it, so you never took damage. It was wild, as it was more of a control deck. Then they also changed from Morphling away, because eventually Morphling didn't do it anymore, let's be honest. Morphling is great.
Yeah, it's a great card, but...
they changed to a different creature, which said when you have Threshold, you can take 3 cards from your graveyard and put them on the bottom of your library.
So would you just expect your opponent to draw themselves out of the game?
No, you just took basically you could make it infinitely big because that's what it did, but also you just basically stack your deck, like you draw whatever you want, right? And this is like, it was better than Morphling because you had access to the best card in your deck, but you could also kill your opponent by just putting all the cards under your library.
Yeah.
So those were the old days. And then once you had the Orchard, you could actually make them have creatures to get your cool creatures into play.
Okay.
And back then we're talking about like Ashen Rider or something like this, where you can destroy something.
Ashen Rider was the big payoff.
Oh, Griselbrand.
Isn't that a 5/5 that exiles a permanent?
Yes, when it comes into play
Yeah.
or leaves. Like I think we have Death Angel or something that only did it when it comes to play. Like then you basically chose the best creature of your choice. You could have Progenitus, as you said. Emrakul also works. Griselbrand, like all of those.
Yeah.
Whatever your flavor of winning today is.
Yeah.
And this is, I mean, it's still played in some of the decks, like the Cube and some...
Yeah, and there's some Oath decks in Legacy.
Yes.
Also, this is one of the favorite, people who are on a budget and are looking for oh, I want to play a crazy combo deck against my friends. This card is not expensive. This card is €2 on Cardmarket.
Yeah, and it's easy to trigger. Of course, in Commander, you're kind of getting a lot of hate for that.
Yeah, this is a way to not get invited to Commander games anymore, but it's a really good way to not get invited to 1v1 kitchen table either, because if you get a Progenitus with this, which costs you maybe €4 or €5 in total,
yeah,
and your opponent is just doing their vampire stuff.
Yeah, this is a very cheap way to have a lot of effect for your buck.
But this is a classic that has survived power creep. It's still incredibly powerful, despite it.
Yeah, it's so good.
Like if this was played in Modern, it'd be all over Modern, if it was playable.
Absolutely. No question about it.
Haha, it's dodge power creep. Next one.
All right, number 2. This is, I think, one of the old rules, and it's kind of obvious why, and also a big favorite. It's Dark Ritual.
Of course.
Dark Ritual was and is iconic. It's one of the things you will never get to lose, because it's just so the Magic card feeling,
Yeah.
You're sacrificing something, in this case cards, to get a little bit of bonus. And I remember the days. I mean, also if you know the game Chandala, which is like not an RPG, but like a running around collecting cards. It's awesome. If you've never played that game,
it's a game where you run around and collect cards?
Yeah, you're like a little guy walking through a desert and trees of forest, and then you meet other people, you fight them, and if you win...
With the cards?
Yeah.
In the forest?
Yeah, and like you play Game of Magic, and then you win one of their cards.
My experience is that Magic players don't tend to hang out in forests and deserts.
No, you were like a little wizard, and then you had to protect them from the big wizards, because they were like dooming the world, and... It's, I don't know, it's like 98 or 7, like a really old game. Yeah. But I think they had cards up until like 4th edition, like all of them. And one of the most easiest part to get like a good starting deck was Dark Ritual Hypnotic Spectre.
It's actually something that recently in Pauper got a bunch of cards banned.
Yep, like Dark Ritual, just for the mana early, was one of the strongest cards in the early days. it changed. Sometimes you put like 3x Negator into play, but that was a 5/5 with a tiny downside of sacrificing permanents once you get damage. But if you're quicker and you remove your opponent's creatures, well, they die very, very quick. Yeah, like the mana usage was not the greatest, but it was good enough. Obviously, nowadays, we know it mainly from Storm decks because it makes mana, it makes you cast more spells, and then eventually you storm off with Tendrils or Brain Freeze or Mind's Desire, even if it's allowed. And this is the main reason why you do it.
All right, Dark Ritual, another card.
And the number one find. It's Lantex. And this is kind of a homage at our Commander players as well, because, Lantex and Commander is just mind blown, bro. You know?
Because for context, for recent times, you're going to tell me about how this was all over the place in past times, but a few years ago, they unbanned Lantex and Legacy, and you had all these competitive pro players outraged, being like, this is a horrible idea, it's going to see play everywhere in Legacy, and then no one really played it. But why was this so good back in the day?
Well, mainly back in the day, you wanted to make sure your land drops hit the battlefield. Your card drawing engines weren't as good, you didn't have Ponder, you didn't have Preordain or Utexim, all of those things. You also didn't have fetch lands, so your mana fixing was maybe a bit like worse. But the main reason was back then how the mulligan worked is you didn't get to do 7 and 6 and 5. For the start of the game, you got to do you have lands in your hand? Yeah, you're good to go. And that means even if you have one land, you had to play that hand.
Yeah.
But if that one land is one land in Lantex, you're good. Like you don't need anything else.
Oh yeah, you miss a land drop, and then you go up to 4 lands.
Yes. That means as soon as you had a Lantex in hand, you didn't have to mulligan once you can cast it. That was a major reason. And after they changed that, obviously, Lantex is really great on the mulligan because you also need one land. Like because even if you have one land of this and you go down to 5 cards, you're getting those cards back.
It's also super powerful when you go second.
Yes.
Right? Because you will always start your turn. If your opponent is playing a land every turn, you will always start your turn for sure on turn 2, for example, with 1 less land.
Yeah.
So then you just draw 3 extra cards.
Yeah, and guaranteeing land drops was the most important things because that meant you can cast your spells, obviously not nowadays, but back then having more lands also is good because you're winning with some very clunky win options. But obviously the card got kind of broken when Brainstorm was released, right? Because then you could actually use your lands to draw actual cards, and that was like Ancestral Recall, like literally Ancestral Recall.
For those of you who don't really understand how the interaction is Brainstorm, you draw 3, but you put 2 back on top, which is usually the punishment. You're technically kind of drawing 1 with selection. But with this, you could put 2 back on top, end of your turn, and then untap, and you just put 2 of the lands back on top, but then would shuffle and just draw 2 random cards. You're trading 2 lands that you might not want because you've been drawing so many lands with this for 2 other free draws off the top of your library.
You could compare this with nowadays Pauper's Quadrant Hawk thing, which is the same idea. You get Quadrant Hawks, you put them back, you can search them again. Yeah. And that was, for a long period of time, one core basic of the control decks. They all of them played that, right? And then it fell off because using your mana like this wasn't good enough anymore. The spells got cheaper, you had more threats for less mana, you didn't have the time to get the engine going and abusing it. Also, you played way less basic lands, so back then you played like 10, 20, like not 20, but 10, 12 basic lands, so that means you could do that all over, also thinning your deck. Even if you discard them, you draw your better cards. Nowadays you play a lot of fetch lands and non-basic lands and utility lands. So when you said it was unbanned, it turned out it just wasn't good enough.
The funny thing is the lands got so good recently that sometimes you don't even have 3 basics to draw with this.
Yeah, it is true. I mean, people complain like, oh, Wasteland kills my whole mana base. Like, yes, it does. But obviously, the format where this card is still very good today is Commander because you do have the space to play a lot of basic lands. And you have, again, the mana you want to use for all your turns ready when you wanted to have them. And I mean, not every white deck kind of plays it or should play it, but it's a very, very easy staple on those.
Yeah, it is definitely one of those cards that if you had your Lantex from back in the day and you're thinking, oh, I want to go back into playing Magic, it seems a lot of fun, Commander seems cool, put this in your deck. You're not going to regret it, and you're getting value from something you bought like 20 years ago.
Yeah, also, if you don't have that and you play like white Commander decks, you should probably get just a copy of it because it's so immeasurably powerful to just play a game where you have a Lantex in hand, you know, like, I'm gonna never have a problem playing my lands for the rest of the game.
As long as all my opponents are not mana screwed, I will also be fine.
I mean, even then you just sit there and says like, okay, you wait because they don't do anything, you can do not do anything. Yeah.
So those are 5 cards that Thoralf selected that survive power creep. If you want to see more of these, Thoralf is an endless wealth of knowledge on Magic. It's insane how much he knows. So please let us know. And in the meantime, please sub if you're not already subbed. And if you are, just tell someone at your FNM about the channel. Maybe they'll sub. And then we'll be happy and our bosses will as well. But thank you, Thoralf. We'll see you guys in the next video.